The first thing I wanted to do was to invite you to, as Patrick said, to say hello. We like to use the chat. We'll be using the chat throughout today's program. So if you guys could go ahead and go into your chat feature, and if you haven't already, just introduce yourself, put your name and your organization in there, then I know that you've found the chat, because we're going to be using chat today to engage virtually real time as a leadership community. So please do go in and say hello to everyone. I think I've gone in. Janine, thank you. Marina, thank you for saying hello. I see Jessica's already signed in. Angela, thank you so much for joining in. Samantha, I see everyone coming on now. So that's great. Just go into the chat feature, say your organization and your name. There's Darde, so thank you so much. Rachel, welcome Rachel and Christy. So thrilled to have all of you joining. So please do use the chat and introduce yourselves. So let's keep going. Today, there are a few things that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking with you about. One is we're going to be looking at crisis leadership and innovation, lessons from the past. When we think about tackling current innovation, one of the first things I like to do are leadership crisis situations is look in the past and see what we can learn from that. We're also going to take a moment to look at innovation trends and momentum that's going on with COVID-19 to give you a little bit of hope. And then we will talk about how to lead courageously during this time. So that is pretty much our agenda for today. If we continue on, the first thing I want to do is to ask Colin to help us with a Zoom poll. If you've not done a Zoom poll before, in just a moment, he's going to present you with an opportunity to participate in a poll. It'll show up on your screen and you just have to vote, basically. And I'm going to be asking you, the question for today is, what is the temperature in your organization with COVID-19? Is it fearful? Or is it, that would be a 1? Or is it hopeful? And that would be a 5, with sort of 3 being neutral. So if you could go ahead and cast your vote into the poll and then hit submit. So leading in this time of crisis, what is the temperature in your organization? 1 would be fearful, 3 would be neutral, and 5 would be hopeful. So let's give that just a moment for allow you guys to cast your vote into the poll. And then when Colin is ready, he'll go ahead and share the results. Okay, so here we go. You can see that the majority of you are pretty much on the fence, feeling that you're neutral in terms of where your leadership temperature, where the temperature is in your organization right now. Some of you are hopeful. That's great. I'm thrilled about that. And there are a few of you that say that you're sort of on the lower scale, not completely fearful, but a little bit, maybe there's some anxiety there. So that gives me a good read of kind of where you are in your organization in terms of that scale with the crisis, hopeful or fearful. And it sounds like most of us are in the positive realm, and that's really good. Thank you, Joy, for signing in. I see some others joining into the chat. Thank you so much. Let's keep going. So one of the things that I think is important to know is that historically, when we look at some of the trends that are coming out from organizations like McKinsey and Company, the United States on par tends to have a pretty optimistic view about what's happening right now with COVID-19. If you look at this particular chart from a McKinsey study in early April, you'll see the US showing that optimism was at about 39%. 44% saying they're a bit unsure, much almost like our poll today with you. Look at China, much more optimistic. Maybe it's because they are ahead of us with the, addressing the pandemic, and other parts of Europe, UK, Spain, and Italy, not so optimistic about the return and rebound of the economy. So at least for the US, I think there's a strong sense of optimism that's a part of our culture and being American. And so we've got to really grab onto that and hold onto that during this time. So let's keep going. Today, we'll be looking a little bit about leadership and historical crisis and seeing what type of lessons we can learn from that. We go on. The next slide is just reflecting back one of the most inspiring stories, tragic but inspiring stories, at least of my lifetime, has been Apollo 13. And as you guys know, on April the 13th in 1970, Apollo 13 was 200,000 miles away from Earth when an oxygen tank exploded 56 hours into the mission, forcing the team to abandon their plans to go to the moon, but instead focus on getting back safely to Earth. It was interesting, the flight director, many of you who know that story and may remember that time in history, flight operations was really critical at this point. So how they came together, and the NASA flight director, Gene Kranz, noted this. He said, "I've never lost an American in space, and I'm sure as hell not gonna lose one now. This crew is coming home, and you've got to believe it. Your team must believe it, and we must make it happen." And that flight operations crew really tackled something that at the beginning they thought was impossible, and created plans A, B, C, and D to get that crew home safely to the Earth. And I think if we look at that type of inspiration, that when we're faced with a challenge and how we come around that as a leadership team, just committing to our teams, we are going to get through this with just unfaltering commitment. And we are going to find ways to do it, whether it's plans A, B, C, and D. Your teams need to hear you saying that. Let's take another look at something that was closer to home. If you guys remember several years ago, the Great Smoky Mountain wildfires, a terrible situation that happened just north of us here, up closer to Knoxville. More than 16,000 acres burning in 2016, with more than 14,000 people evacuated. In a very short period of time, 5 Rotary clubs came together and partnered with the city and county government to mobilize an infrastructure donation center that was a 125,000 square foot warehouse, and basically turned it into a Walmart distribution center that was free for victims. I can remember being a member of Rotary here in Chattanooga, that they were so on it in terms of their daily assessment of needs. I remember getting an email saying we received 4 tractor trailer loads of Pop-Tarts yesterday. We don't need any more. So the important thing that happened with this group is that they mobilized quickly in a collaborative way, and they used something as simple as email. And they were using these emails daily to send the word out through a network, through all Rotary clubs, what their needs were at that moment and what they didn't need, right? So it wasn't just what they did need, it was what they didn't need. And so it's interesting, I guess later, after the crisis, there was a group that came in from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, exploring, how they mobilized such an extraordinary relief effort so quickly in Sevierville. And the Federal Emergency Management Association said, "Who was in charge of this logistics?" Right? Said, "Who was your expert?" And the guy said, "It was me, and I'm just a school teacher." Well, his commitment and his use of organization planning came through in real time to mobilize this amazing relief effort for the Great Smoky Mountain wildfires. So many times we don't feel that we're equipped. Many times we don't feel that we've had the training. But in fact, if we rely on our natural skills and attributes and get those around us bringing in their natural skills and attributes, it's amazing what you can mobilize. And I'm sure you've seen that in your own organization. So let's keep going. What I'd like to do now is ask you to use the chat again and finish this sentence for me. Leading innovation in a crisis requires, just go ahead and respond. So leading innovation in a crisis requires what? How would you answer that question? Creativity, compassion, flexibility, hope, patience and flexibility. I agree with that. Agility, yes. Changing, always changing. Love, absolutely. Focus and empathy, transparency. Great job, everybody. And I think all those things are necessary, and that's probably why it feels so extremely stressful, is you've got to be so much to so many. I see adaptation coming in, calmness, absolutely. Let's keep going. So today, let's look at what's happened with COVID-19 so far, and let's look a little bit beyond the region. Let's look at some of the innovation and responsiveness that's happening around the world. So in this next slide, I wanted to talk to you about some of the elements that we see emerging around leading in this crisis. One of the things that we see as most important is to identify mission critical challenges. It's very easy in this environment that could be complete chaos to get completely overwhelmed. So you've got to determine what's most mission critical. Then you've got to champion teams and collaborative partnerships around those mission critical challenges, and then foster creativity, probably bolder creativity than you've seen in most of your traditional work, and rapid prototype and testing, sort of build to learn what's going to work, and then communicate broadly what you're doing, what people can expect, what's working, what you're mobilizing, and then mobilize. So as we go through these examples around innovation trends so far in COVID-19, let's keep these elements in mind. So right now, if you could help me know, what is a mission critical challenge that your organization is facing? If you could use the chat and give us some perspective about what you're seeing there, that would be great. Okay, anything? Share a mission critical challenge your organization is facing. Being able to work face to face with families. Tremendous increase in basic needs assistance. Absolutely. Keeping staff employed, top of the list. Yep. Taking care of the family. Okay, let's keep going. Converting matches that are used to seeing each other at school to technology communication. Yes. So let's look at what's happening around the world and what we can learn from that and the inspiration that we can gather. This particular example that I'm talking to you about here comes from Sonia Maranjakov, and she is a senior researcher leader from the RAND Europe Institute. And she is talking about some of the mobilization of collaboration and technology that they've seen in the UK responding to COVID-19. They've mobilized interdisciplinary and cross-sector collaboration in full force. You'll see that one of the things that they've done with the National Health Service is they've launched a hackathon. They're looking for organizations to come together in just 2 days to create technology innovation. They're even funding it, several million, $164 million, euros that they've set aside to fund these innovations. So big collaboratives going on between the National Health Service, the RAND organization, other policy organizations mobilizing hackathons. They're also looking at working with the National Health Service to mobilize volunteerism. They have gone to the front line of those that are working through the hospital systems where they need volunteers, and now you can go onto the National Health Service website and see areas where you can volunteer. So that one entity is mobilizing technology innovation, volunteerism, as well as on-the-ground innovations like these new ventilators that are coming forward. So where there's a critical mass of will and clear priorities, innovation can quickly respond. So let's keep going. This is a very interesting trend that started with Startup Link and the Health Innovation Exchange and the Moscow Agency of Innovations. They've put together a collaborative innovation map showing where COVID-19 innovations are happening around the world. You'll see 133 sort of up close there in terms of the hot spot for COVID innovations. This map is showing opportunities and innovations around prevention of COVID, diagnostics of COVID, treatment, and life and business adaptations. So you can go onto this site and you can see collaboratively around the world, early innovations that are starting to be developed and are posting. This helps us accelerate our work from those that are doing it ahead of us and to build on that work. Okay, let's keep going. This is another example from the Global Innovation Exchange where they've put together a hub of social innovation and medical-facing innovation for everything in response to COVID-19. It includes everything from student innovation to the social sector to the business and corporate sector. So you can actually join one of these innovation collaboratives in this organization and seek funding, or you can just watch the innovations that are coming through and see if that is inspiration for your own organization. Let's keep going. I like to look a little deeper, not just look at the collaborative efforts underway, which are very inspiring, but to look at some of the surge and urgent, what we call urgent innovation, things that are on the front line that people are responding to. Look at this virus-killing smoot that looks a little bit like a ski mask that you're going to be putting on that blocks viruses, or this 3D printed hands-free door opener. One of my favorites is this new digital device that you put on your wrist that monitors every time you try to touch your face, and it will vibrate so that you don't touch your face. So what is inspiring about these particular innovations to me is that immediately people are getting clear on what is the problem and then mobilizing innovation teams to respond to it. Let's keep going. Here's another example, this constant temperature monitoring. This is an organization that's developed a patch that tells your temperature. And no matter where the physician goes or the provider goes in the hospital, they can constantly check your temperature on their iPhone or on their digital device. So constantly monitoring your temperature through a patch that's on the patient. Or look at what happened in Hunan, the robotics delivery, solving the last mile issue where they're delivering medicines and food and supplies using robots into areas in Wuhan that were affected by the COVID-19 virus at the onset. Or look at the new use of drone technology where they're going into hospital and bathroom systems and using drones to diffuse ultraviolet light that will kill all of the virus germs. So it's pretty amazing. We see some of the innovation that's occurring. Let's keep going. This is an interesting thing where you see a provider, a physician, very close to the problem situation where there's not enough ventilators. In just 3 days of rapid prototyping, he created, Dr. Rice Thomas created his own sort of mini ventilator. This is a much more basic one than the more progressive ones, but most patients can use this type of ventilator and can apply it themselves without having to be intubated with a ventilator by a medical team. So he's come up with a kind of a low scale ventilator that he's using based on severity. So those who are not so severe are using this one and then moving on to the more robust ventilators for others. So here's an example of, again, a provider turning into an innovator right on the front line. Just keep going. I love this example of Chattanooga whiskey where all organizations, many organizations are looking at their assets and they're saying, how can we help in this time of crisis? So Chattanooga Whiskey's launched their own version of hand sanitizer. It's a very fun looking bottle, like not nice packaging, but before you get too excited, I've looked on their website and they're sold out for the near future. But this is a way that many organizations are looking at their assets and seeing how they can help. Let's keep going. So what I'd like for you to do is to think about whether it's these innovations or innovations that you've observed in your own network. Share with us a COVID-19 innovation in the region right here in the Chattanooga, North Georgia region that has inspired you. I'll give you an opportunity to go into the chat and share with us some of the inspirational things that you've seen as the region has responded to COVID-19. So if you just type into the chat, we'll take a look at your thoughts here. The restaurant industry tip website, yes. I was noticing that table 1 saying who can deliver in my area now. Other innovations that you're seeing. As we're waiting on your responses, I have to brag on Colin's wife. She's a school teacher in Walker County. And within a couple of days after the stay-at-home order was issued, the Walker County school system had teachers packaging food boxes and using school buses to distribute those food boxes to children, and that mobilized quickly. 3D printer farm set up at a STEM school to make face shields. 3D printers making masks. The school system using the bus network, yes, to deliver foods. Janine Carpenter, she's saying that too. Southern Champion Tray making shields for healthcare workers, absolutely. So you see many of us saying, how can we help? How can we mobilize our assets to help? Let's keep going. Just as we kind of wrap up our look at innovation and the time of COVID-19, this quote by Paul Romer, Nobel laureate, talks about a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I remember recently my kids, are, like probably most of your kids, are doing homeschooling now or distance learning. And one of the educators on the news had said people would have predicted it would have taken us 2 or 3 years to convert our entire curriculum to an online remote curriculum, and we did it in 3 days. So crisis does have sort of this intentionality, this movement to respond quickly and to be innovative and bold thinking very quickly. And Paul talks about the coronavirus pandemic as a similar critical situation when priorities are clear, that's that mission critical priorities, and rigid rules and regulations become pliable, then leaders pay attention and change, even far-reaching change, is possible. Or this other quote from Scott Anthony with Insight Partner, he talks about constraints are innovation enablers. And sometimes we don't think about that when we have constraints. Many of us get frustrated with them. But actually constraints can actually mobilize even more significant innovation. Small teams are faster at mobilizing innovation than larger ones. Teams with tight budgets are better at mobilizing innovations than those with big loose budgets. And tight milestones actually force teams to address critical assumptions quickly. So all of those things are in our environment right now. So hopefully will fuel all of us as leaders to focus on innovation. Let's keep going. Let's now turn our attention to leading courageously in this time of innovation. One of the things I wanted to just kind of walk through here at the beginning is what we call a leader's foresight mindset. So what we see in terms of leaders today is that they have to be able to look forward. They have to be able to anticipate these types of trends and then anticipate how their teams need to respond. So this foresight perspective. And you'll see here our good friends at Koehn published the Futurist Mindset. And we particularly love this description of leadership competencies. We think it hits home in all the right areas for leaders today. If you think about the first one, crave curiosity. So even as the post-COVID normalcy, whatever that's going to be, comes to pass, I hope that you'll continue to crave curiosity about how things can be better, about how you can team differently, how you can collaborate differently, how you can engage corporates with their assets to help you. Crave curiosity in asking those questions. And act courageously. Ask the questions that others won't ask. Take the courage to mobilize new thinking around a particular problem. Welcome diversity. Get others engaged in coming up with ideas beyond your walls. Invite others to participate in solutions that are not inside your organization, people who see things differently. And think outrageously. It's when we think bold and then we refine those bold thoughts to things that are practical that we actually come up with something significant to really help others. And then connect the dots. This is where we look at multiples, kind of relates to the one below, many different opportunities that we could pursue. And many times it's not a singular focus, it's a focus that connects with another focus that creates even a bolder approach to solving a problem, or connecting a member of your team with another member of your team that doesn't necessarily always work together to fuel a new combined capability for your organization. Let's keep going. If some of you, one of my favorite leadership gurus of all time is Simon Sinek, and it's a part of getting prepared for leading in COVID. I've done a lot of research on Simon, and I'm saying, what is Simon up to these days? What's he saying? And I found this interview that he had completed and a blog post that he had done where he talks about companies that will thrive aren't focused on getting back to normal. They're focused on how to create a new normal. And I think that's an important message for us and for us to take to our teams, that there will be no going back. There's going to be a going forward. And in that going forward, it's like, what will we actually launch? Where will we go from here? He talks about the opportunities is what will be. How will we preserve what we had? It's not that direction. Instead, it's you've got to think about where you're going and how you will embark on this new journey using all the new technology tools that you've used in the last few weeks. So focus on how we create the new normal. Let's keep going. So here's an example of research study that's coming in from McKinsey, one of the largest consultancies in the world. And they talk about leadership in a crisis and responding to coronavirus outbreak. And they've given several different tips here. If you were to think, where's my lessons from the leading consultancies around the world? They talk about the importance of organizing a response using a network of teams. So don't go it alone. And many of you are doing that now. You're collaborating with Venture Forward, you're collaborating with other partners, with some of your donors, with different foundations. You're creating your network of teams. That you're elevating leaders during a crisis, that you have to, of all in your organization, be deliberate about the calm and how you're approaching the task in front of you with unbounded optimism. If you don't believe, they're not going to believe. So remember that it's a heavy weight, it's a heavy burden to have on your shoulders, but you are the leader and it's up to you to demonstrate that. You have to make decisions amid uncertainty. And there will be times when you're not completely sure that you're going to have to make the call. And when you do that, you're going to continue to check. And if your results are not what you thought, you're going to course correct. And people need to understand that decisions are going to be needed quickly. You're going to be monitoring that. And if you have to course correct, that you do it quickly, right? So rather than being frozen and not doing anything, mobilize and monitor to mobilize action. And be empathetic. And I know that's probably a natural skill. You wouldn't be in your profession if you didn't have a high degree of empathy. But at this point in time, I think it's important to embrace not only your clients, but your team members, and know that this is difficult for all of us, and try to understand it from their perspective. And then of all, be very transparent with your communications. These are the priorities. These are the things that we're mobilizing for action. This is how we're going to monitor our progress. This is when we're going to meet again. Very, very clear and transparent communication and updates. Let's keep going. So let's use the Zoom chat and share with me an example of a partner that you've added to your crisis response team network during COVID-19. So think about where you are now. What partners are you engaged with to respond to COVID-19? Help us see that on group chat. If you could just respond to that for a moment, that'd be great. Doxy.me, okay. Other ones? Early childhood educators, absolutely. Other Tennessee orchestras, sort of like gathering the family together across different boundaries. What else? Hospices, sort of going through the care delivery supply chain line down the continuum. Other partners in your crisis response team network. Anyone reaching out to technology agencies or startups or other resources like that? Okay. I guess a lot of you now are connected with Zoom. The Enterprise Center, absolutely. Good job. Got Doxy.me and a telehealth platform. Excellent. Okay, good. Let's keep going. So here's an example, some more insight from Stanford. There's David Demarest, who was the chief of staff, actually, who was a chief communications director for a former president, and is now on faculty for Stanford's business school. And David talks about the fact that in crisis leadership, he's created this playbook. And he says, keep your finger on the pulse. It's crucial to understand what the needs are. and what the fears are. So both the needs and the fears. So calming the fears and responding to the needs so that you keep that calm, you mitigate that and respond to it at the same time that you're communicating clearly around needs and how you're responding to those two things. Going through crisis, as we all know, is very emotional. So take a look at some of the tips here. Communicate clearly, don't guess. If you're uncertain about it, say we're uncertain about it. If you're saying we're still evaluating it, say we're still evaluating it, but be transparent and clear. Don't just announce changes. This is a really critical time to ask. Ask your partners, ask your employees, what do you think? How do you see the best path forward? How should we engage with this? What ideas do you have? So as you're leading in this time of crisis, don't forget to pause and ask the question. Engage them in the solution, engage your team members, engage your partners, engage your volunteers in formalizing the path forward. The other part he talks about is thinking ahead of the crisis. What will happen next? You're starting to see so much communication coming out now post-COVID-19. If you haven't put together any type of committee or a small thinking group to talk about what will happen after we're allowed to go back and come out of our homes and how will we operate then, you should be thinking about that. And then stand by your core values. When there's so much chaos going on, people want to know what you stand for. And if that's open and honest communication, if that's being transparent, if your value system is to be empathetic, whatever those core values are for your organization, live them vigorously right now. And then David talks about just shut up and listen. Constantly be listening for nuances of change that you need to be responding to. I think we have time. We're going to jump to the next slide. And I think we're going to try to show this 1-minute video from David where he talks about leading through a crisis.
If you think about this, the speed at which a crisis develops, far faster than it ever did before. And so you may not have all the information you would like. You may not know all the facts. And that might lead you to not respond. You know, there's a natural tendency, well, we don't have all the facts, so we can't really say anything. Well, what you can say is what your values are. And what you can talk about your values, and that whatever you do in response to a particular crisis is going to be based on the values of your organization or your company. Companies that don't really have clarity about their values and are kind of coming up with them on the fly, they're at a tremendous disadvantage. Conversely, companies that have a very clear sense of who they are, what they stand for, even in the midst of crisis, they have competitive advantage.
So he talks about the importance of values. And I know that when I visited with Leslie and Patrick and team and Abby at the United Way with Ada, their values are posted on all over the place in every floor. And you'll see the United Way values and what they stand for and what they celebrate. So if that's unfamiliar for you, think about that as you go through this change, as you go through the response to COVID. What are your organizational values and how do you demonstrate them to your team, to your volunteers, and to your partners so they know where you stand and philosophically what your anchor is? Let's keep going. There was another interview that came in from Simon Sinek where he talked to Chris Fussell. Chris is one of the authors of this bestseller, How Do We Lead Through Chaos? Team of Teams. And it is a book that's written about the US Navy SEALs and how they mobilized in Afghanistan in a very, very grueling war situation. And Chris talks about, as a leader of that US Navy SEAL team, how they approached dealing with this crisis very differently from a military mobilization standpoint. He said that they actually created a new normal of continuous communication, much like the task force situation that you see going on right now in this region, where daily They had a 60 to 9-minute virtual meeting using a platform similar to Zoom. It had a very structured agenda, and every day 6,000 soldiers from the most senior to the lower level ranks would get on a call, and you knew exactly what was going on in this crisis and mobilizing against the Afghanistan war. He said that it really decentralized decision making. It allowed best practices to fuel in quickly into the group without having to go through ranks. So it created lots of speed. He would say that they would actually use chat constantly throughout the conversation. So anyone, if they presented a problem that they felt they were going to be facing for that day or the next few days, anyone could suggest a response to it. They also set up sub-chat rooms so that people could have, geographic conversations or specialty conversations as a part of that breakout. And they would oftentimes have one-to-one conversations also happening as a part of this 60 to 90-minute ritual. So it's very interesting to see that when other organizations have mobilized in the midst of chaos and done well, how they've used technology and how they've used these regular, very structured, it's not just get on and share, but a very structured agenda of what they're trying to accomplish, where they are, what's working, what's not, what are we going to be doing about it? And then also areas that they don't know the answer to allow for brainstorming. All that's happening on this 60 to 90-minute call. They would even actually have a timekeeper designated to ensure that the call stayed on task. So very structured, and a lot of inspiration, I think, coming in from this book from Chris on how do we lead through chaos, team of teams. Let's keep going. This last bit of inspiration I wanted to share with you comes from Bob Rogers. He is a former president of DDI, one of the largest leadership development and leadership skills companies in the world. And he talks about the importance of staying calm. Stay calm and take charge and mobilize change. Ask questions, continually communicate and address rumors. When things are moving so fast, people sometimes aren't sure what they're hearing. Many times you have to state it, you have to restate it, and then you have to restate it again. Don't be cut short by the fact that you said, I've already told them once, they should know. Make sure that you're continually communicating so that people are clear and the rumor mill is not growing around something that's false information. Focus on the future and inspire confidence with your team that you're going to get through this, and it's really working together and getting all of their insights and ideas that you'll mobilize well. Let's keep going. From the Center for Creative Leadership, they have published their perspective on 5 ways to lead through a crisis. And they're talking about the fact that finding your sources of credible information are really, really important. So that in this time when so much data is flying at you, that you know what are the sources that you're following. And that you're using the appropriate communication channels for the right audiences and being visible and present as much as possible using technologies like we're doing today. This is where he talks about, Gene Klein talks about review, repeat, and reinforce communications. Through communications, people's fears start to calm down. They know what the focus is. They know the focus of the crisis. They know what's being mobilized. And that's one of the ways that you try to mitigate fear. And that's the other way how you mobilize action is through communication. So it can't say enough about how important a good, solid communications plan is that's done almost daily right now. They offer a crisis leadership self-assessment, and we're going to be working with Ada and Patrick to get that sent out to you guys as a post this conference today. But we're going to take a look at, if we go on to the next slide, we're going to try to take a look at least 3 of the assessment areas and see if across this group today we can get a pulse of where you guys sit on some of their traits that they talk about that are really important in terms of crisis leadership. And you'll see on this survey, when you'll get a link to this post the program today. You can do it. You can do it with your team. You can do it with your board or with partners, and see where they sit on this crisis leadership self-assessment. And based on your score, you're either sort of in the category of leading the way, or maybe you're in the category of unprepared. But at least you'll know from the research as experts around crisis leadership kind of what the attributes are and kind of where you guys stand. So let's go on to the next. I think it's a poll for us. I'm going to ask you guys to respond and rate your crisis leadership traits and qualities. Remember that 1 is low and 5 is very high. So watch for the poll coming in from Colin, and let's look at this particular attribute. I can maintain calm and self-control in the time of crisis. So how would you rate yourself right now? High or low? High being a number 5, low being a number 1 in terms of maintaining calm and self-control. If you guys could just respond to the poll there from Colin, and then when he sees that folks have responded, he'll share with us the results and we'll go from there. Okay, so good. I see lots of calm. That's wonderful. Congratulations. So you're on the right path. Let's go to the next poll, Colin. The next poll that we're going to be talking about presents another question from the survey. I act courageously and take risk. So very high is a number 5, 1 is low. How would you say that you are now operating in terms of acting courageously and taking action in the time of crisis? Let's get your feedback as a group and see where everybody sits. Okay, so in this one, we're a bit all over the map. It takes, depending on the pulse of your organization, some groups are much more open to bold creativity and bold courage than others. So it looks like some opportunities for collaborating and kind of moving up the scale there. So we're kind of neutral on that one. But tough crisis many times require bold solutions. So that's an area for growth. Leading in a time of crisis, I establish a clear vision and direction. How well do you think you're accomplishing that right now as a leader? Very high is a 5, low is a 1. I establish a clear vision and direction. So how do you feel like you're doing in that regard? Have you given your team a clear focus? Okay, let's see the results coming in from Colin. Okay, so very good. Most all of you felt like that you're have been communicating very clearly what are your priorities and where are you going. So good job. Congratulations on that. So that's got to feel great as a team. You're coming together on that. So let's keep going. The last bit of inspiration I want to share with you today comes from Nancy Koehn, and she is a professor at business administration at Harvard Business School. She talks about real leaders are forged in a crisis. So if you feel a bit exhausted, you're growing, you're working hard. I know that. And it's hard to grow and develop as a leader during this time, but it's essential. She talks about the importance of leaders acknowledging people's fears and then encourage them with great resolve. So it's important that if people are acting a bit fearful or being a bit cautious, to acknowledge that and encourage them to move beyond their fear and focus on the deliverables that you have. It's also important to give people a role and a purpose. And we'll see an example of this in a few minutes, but if you're not involved, if you're sitting on the sidelines, it's paralyzing in terms of fear. So make sure each member of your team has a clear role and purpose for the work they're doing right now, including your board and your volunteers. Emphasize the importance of experimentation and learning. There are many times that we are going through uncharted waters. We don't know the answer to some of these solutions or some of these problems that are facing us. And so it's important for us to say, look, we're going to be experimenting with a new path, and we're going to learn, and we're going to evolve that until we nail it, until we've declared the right path forward. So set your time frame for rapid experimentation and learning, and then mobilize from there. And then tend to the energy and the emotion. That means even for yourself, giving yourself a bit of a break, making sure you have time to decompress, and making sure that you're taking care of your team like that too. Let's keep going. Some of the examples that she talks about in her book, her article, she mentions this wonderful quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt where he says, "The only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. There is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. There are many ways in which it can be helped, but it can never be helped merely by talking about it. We must act and act quickly." So if you think of what he mobilized during his era, this ability to experiment and to try new things and to evaluate those in order to find the right solution. Let's keep going. One of my famous leaders that I love to study historically is Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer, and the amazing journey that he led into the Antarctic when his team was stranded in the ice, and how he was relentless in getting them home safely. He talks about that daily routines and tasks helped to establish order when there was this time of uncertainty. And when their ship was completely stuck on the ice, he actually had them continuing to clean the deck and to go about their regular task. And 4 months and 3 attempts later, he finally got back to save his men. It was an amazing story. So his relentless dedication to finding a solution to getting them free from the ice, and he did it. Let's keep going. So Nancy herself gives this particular guidance to us as leaders in a time of crisis. Take care of yourself, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. That means whatever that means for you, if that's music or nature or exercise, making sure that you're taking care of your whole self so that you're managing that stress. Model the behavior you want to see and use your body language and words and actions to signal conviction and courage during this really unusually crisis-oriented time. Let's keep going. And don't forget to say thank you. So as I leave you today with some last bit of words, I want to think about leading courageously in some 4 areas that I want to just sort of encourage you to think about. One is to stay calm and to get beyond your bias. And when we talk about that, we talk about leaders who have a lot of history say, well, we can't go that way, that will never happen, or this will never work. This is a time when you have to unlock that bias and experiment with new things to create bold new solutions. Inspire hope and engage with uncertainty. So make sure that you're sending those positive messages, just like the control center with the NASA Apollo 13. We're going to find a way to get you home. Set clear goals with absolute alignment. Make sure all your teams are really clear, even if it's just the goal for today, or if it's a goal for the week, or the goal for the next 2 weeks. Absolute alignment on the priorities that are going on. And he talks about the importance of building a resilient nerve center, making sure that you've set up structures for very rapid decision making, that you've set up structures for monitoring your progress, so that if you are trying new things, that you're monitoring that progress so that you can adapt and learn from those results and then continue to iterate them. And then communicate. Let's keep going. So as we wrap up today, one of the most amazing innovators of her day, Harriet Tubman, who made it to freedom herself and then did so many missions after that to free so many people, has this wonderful inspirational quote for us. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength and the patience and the passion to reach for the stars and to change the world. And so I just encourage you as leaders, I know this is a difficult time, but it is this time of crisis when real leaders step forward. Take care of yourself. Make sure that your path is really clear about your priorities, and encourage your teams to be dreamers, to reach for the stars, to create this new future that we're embarking on now post-COVID-19. So thank you so much for a wonderful time to spend with you today. Any comments or questions that you want to post in the chat as we wrap up? Okay.
Jenny, thank you so much for sharing just your insight and wisdom with us today. I know that I was taking notes, as I'm sure that a lot of other people on this webinar were. And so thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, I'll be on the line for a little bit longer in case you do have questions. But if not, thank you so much for participating in this webinar today. Thank you, Jenny and Colin, again. And we just hope that you'll continue to engage with Venture Forward webinars. So thanks, guys.